It came to Paris at the end of March in 1832. Having not met a worthy medical rebuff, it destroyed half of the infected. The patient's faces wrinkled from dehydration in a matter of hours, tear ducts dried up, blood became sticky, oxygen-deprived muscles cramped up to breaks. The organs failed one by one. The patients went into a state of shock, spewing liquid stool in liters. It was an ugly, humiliating, savage disease that offended the noble feelings of Europeans in the 19th century. It came on so fast that terrible stories spread around the city about how a person, having sat down to dine, was already dead by desert. The disease brought the urban medics into confusion. One of them reported on the examination of the couple who had been infected with cholera. The bed and linen were soaked with odorless liquid, and while the woman kept asking for water, the man was lying unconscious next to her. The doctor tried to feel a pulse. "I have never touched the skin like this, though I have been at the deathbed many times. My heart went cold because of that touch. I couldn't believe that the body I touched was still alive." The skin on the arms of the doomed couple wrinkled as if they had been under the water for a long time, or more likely, as if they were the corpse arms which had been lying for more than a day. This is what cholera looked like, one of the most dangerous diseases of the 19th century. It cared nothing for money or status. It affected all, kings and peasants, dukes and emigrants. No one resisted the master's will. The master named cholera vibrio. This particular bacterium was responsible for the pandemics that killed millions in the 19th and 20th centuries. But where did this cholera vibrio come from, and how could it get settled in the human's organism? Tiny crustaceans, called copepods, will tell us about this. They are about a millimeter long, teardrop-shaped with the only bright red eye. They are classified as zooplankton. They cannot move independently in the water for long distances and travel with the flow along with the water masses. Long mustaches like wings help them navigate the streams of water, and although few people know about the existence of copepods, this is the most numerous multicellular animal in the world. More than 2,000 copepods can live on one sea cucumber. During the season, each individual can produce up to 4.5 billion offspring. It may seem that this is not much, because it is only 4.5 billion millimeters. But this is the offspring of only one individual. But what if each of these crustaceans gives birth to offspring of the same size? So, vibrio cholera, the culprit of our video, is the bacterial partner of copepods. Like other members of the vibrio genus, it is a bacterium that looks like a microscopic comma. Despite the fact that the vibrio can independently exist in water, it prefers to stick around copepods inside and out, attaching itself to their egg chambers and lining the inside of their intestines. Like all crustaceans, copepods are covered with chitin, a kind of protective shell, and due to the fact that they grow all their lives, as they grow, they drop their tight shell into the water. Every year, copepods leave a total of 100 billion tons of chitin on the seabed, which are then absorbed by vibrios, processing together 90% of chitinous debris. Without them, mountains of exoskeletons grown and then dumped by copepods would soon use up all the carbon and nitrogen in the ocean. Such an important ecological function is performed by this dangerous vibrio. But I'm lying when I say that particularly this vibrio is the only dangerous. After all, over time, it had a twin brother, which managed to move away from the former function and adapt to the human body. How did it happen? Vibrios and copepods bred and multiplied in warm, brackish river deltas where fresh and seawater mix, such as the Sundarbans, extensive swampy forests in the basin of the world's largest marine Bay of Bengal. They lived comfortably until a man came to their homeland, and not an ordinary man, but enterprising English colonialists. By the hands of the hired employees from the local population, they built the dams and planted rice. The 19th century chroniclers described these places as flooded lands that are covered with jungle, suffocating from malaria, teeming with wild animals, but incredibly fertile. By the end of the 19th century, human settlements occupied about 90% of the once virgin and impassable, teeming with copepods, Sundarbans. Local fishermen and peasants constantly lived knee-deep in the brackish water, just in places ideal for the copepod's reproduction. The fisherman rinses his face, the peasant takes water from a slightly flooded well where there are a lot of copepods. Due to such close contact with the copepods, the vibrions had the opportunity to get acquainted with a person. Indeed, up to 7,000 vibrions can live on one copepod. Like zoonosis, the cholera vibrio infected only those people who had dealt with its natural reservoir, copepods. But in order to move from person to person, it needed favorable conditions. This is a warm, comfortable environment, plus constant contact with a human being, and a little bit of evolution. There were plenty of ways to adjust to people, but it ensured itself the future, having learned how to create microcolonies in the intestines and develop a toxin. The last skill became its main advantage. Developing toxin vibrion made the rest of the intestinal bacteria being flushed out by the rapid liquid flow, getting rid of the competitors. It allowed the vibrion to settle down there, while its microcolonies tightly clung to the intestinal walls. Also, due to the patient's uncontrolled and violent stool, vibrio cholera penetrated anywhere. For example, onto the next victim's unwashed hands, or into the waste pipes, which he had polluted. In fact, the inept handling of waste products by the Europeans of that time was quite convenient to cholera. Because of the lack of knowledge about bacteria, the disease spread around the whole world. In those days, pouring waste into the rivers was absolutely normal. The main thing was not to have to breathe in an unpleasant smell. According to the miasmatic theory of Hippocrates, all the infection that causes epidemics is in the air and spreads through foul-smelling evaporation through the so-called miasma that poisons those who breathe it in. It was not acceptable to talk about the bacteria in the 19th century, taking into account that fact that the microscope had been invented 200 years ago. But the medical community was steadfast in its ignorance. Scientific minds stubbornly refused to admit that the vibrio was transmitted through water. It would have been enough just to purify the water to take it from the river above, before tons of excrements from the infected citizens had been poured into it. Even then, people wouldn't have died so rapidly. They also refused to treat themselves with saline, which replenished the body's fluid loss, which was caused by vomiting and diarrhea, and gave patients enormous chances of survival. However, they denied that method because of the loyalty to that Hippocratic paradigm, and from the point of conservative scientists, everything looked more than logical. The sick are suffering from diarrhea and vomiting because the body struggles to expel the poison that has entered it with miasma. Interfering with that process with the help of salt water would have been as stupid as today picking off the crust on the wound in the hope that in this way it will heal faster. And even the amazing experience of William Stevens couldn't convince anyone. In 1832, he was the simplest doctor. However, having faced with cholera, he managed to overstep prejudice. In a London hospital, he gave patients salty liquids to drink, and he got a perfect result. Only 4% of patients died. That was dozens of times superior to the best results that the scientific luminaries of that time could have demonstrated. However, that was of no use. Stevens just wasn't taken seriously. The experts who visited the prison where he had carried out his experiments stated not a single case was found with the symptoms consistent with cholera. They were ready to recognize as cholera patients only those who fought in agony and were near death, and if none were found, then in fact there was no cholera in the prison. That's the logic. In the scientific community, Stevens was even called a charlatan and advised to forget about his useless scam. And some even laughed at it. In 1844, one reviewer wrote, "Unlike pork and herring, salting the sick does little to prolong their lives." However, Stevens was not the only one who disputed the established paradigm. There were others as well, and there were more and more of them. The miasmatic theory of Hippocrates fell like a house of cards, especially when John Snow, an authoritative scientist of that time, joined the controversy. He managed to collect irrefutable evidence in his favor and explained that cholera was infected through the use of contaminated water. It has been a long time since Snow's ideas began to be listened to. The sewers were reconstructed. Now, the waste was not dumped into the river, but stored in specially designated places. So, the number of people who fell in sharply decreased, and treatment with saline helped to cope with the disease for those who were still infected. So, the world managed to defeat cholera, but not to destroy it. Even in the modern world, this disease still encroaches on people's lives. This mainly affects developing countries, where it is still very bad with clean drinking water and a normal sewerage system. For example, in 2010, there was a cholera outbreak in Haiti. More than 200,000 people were infected and 4,500 died. So, it's too early to forget about it. Although there are vaccines against cholera, most of them are effective only for 6 months, after which the effectiveness of the action gradually decreases. However, this disease is still treated, and quite successfully. It remains to hope that the world will not have to face another pandemic. Like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to the channel. There is going to be a lot of medical history ahead. Bye everyone!